Welcome on board the RichPlanet starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall. This week's guest is a researcher of UFOs and human perception manipulation. With a background in media and electronics, he is currently investigating claims of human mind control. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. Miles Johnston.
Wow, jeez, it's so far. Oh, hello, hello. Good.
How
to
are
see
you?
God, it makes you cold out, you know.
Really?
I've seen the movies, you know. You get that bit of frostbite, you know. It's down to the molecular. Well, you know what I mean.
We'll get your record card sorted for you. Miles.
Hello.
Now, you've been investigating UFOs for 30 years, am I right?
Wee bit longer than that, but we'll just leave it 30 years for the censors.
All right. And you set up an organisation in Ireland, I believe.
Yeah, we started the first UFO investigations a long time ago in the 70s. We called it the Irish UFO Research Centre. Mm-hmm. And we were the first people to do actually start doing proper UFO research.
Right.
And that led us to quite a lot of early stories in the 70s and
Right.
early on to the 80s. And we were closely affiliated with the Before organisation as it was then. Unfortunately, things have gone a bit, have changed since then.
The British UFO
That's the British UFO
Research.
Research Association, of which
Yeah.
I was the regional investigations coordinator for.
Right. Now, some people think that Before were there to try and put cold water on UFO cases.
I think that's been, I mean, without being too, I mean, a lot of good people in there, but it seems to be clear that there was a situation where there's a lot of information in and very little information out. But there's some people have now been able to start digitizing some of the records, and I'm in there in those early days. So I was proud to be a contributor and to help wake up. And we ran a very good little organisation. We published a magazine called the Irish UFO News.
Right.
And
Now,
so forth.
now you spent your time during those years attending conferences, and you filmed a lot of the speakers and a lot of the researchers. So you've got a vast archive of
Yeah,
people on
essentially,
camera.
we recorded them on tape, audio tape, cassette at that time. But as technology evolved, I started to record stuff. And the first stuff possibly was the Barry King material, which I published as basis.
That was the first stuff, and we will come on to Barry King
Yeah.
later in the interview. Now, one of your most impressive interviews was with Dr. Rowney Kilder,
Yes.
who was the Finnish chief medical officer.
She was she's former chief medical officer of Finland.
Mind control technology affecting our consciousness and microchips and the planned future for mankind. I had this this lecture in Charlottesville in Virginia in April, and it says here she's a Finnish best-selling author living in Norway, retired chief medical officer of North Finland, Lapland, with 3 medical specialities. Her biography is in American Who is Who in the World, Who is Who in Medicine and Healthcare, Who is Who in Science and Engineering. She's the first doctor to have published near-death experiences of children in '82 in the international bestseller There Is No Death. This book is in 6 languages.
And is a fine lady and first-class character. And I have a friend in Norway who I'd been trying to get to see Rowney for a considerable length of time. And then one day I was talking to my Norwegian friend, and she says, "Do you want to talk to Rowney Kilder?" And just simply put the phone across the desk. And she lives right there in Norway where my friend was, so I was able to go and interview her in the winter time, and it was a wonderful experience, and she's a great lady.
And she has written best-selling books on out-of-body experiences.
She has written a whole series of very high-selling books in Nordic European languages. And a lot of people have asked about an English book, but she's now writing an English book. But she had started to do the English and American lecture circuit, and she did live in Wiltshire for quite a time as well.
Right.
So people saw her then, and she got familiar with what was going on with the crop circles. And obviously, she then started to develop an analysis of mind control, which is the main reason I wanted to see her.
Right. Now she's a woman in a highly, top job in the Finnish government.
Yeah.
And she was taken seriously with these books. She wasn't you know, by a lot of
Well,
people,
this,
she was
this
taken
is what she
seriously.
describes in the interview. In that, in essence, in the United States and probably in this country, there's a pill solves all for every kind of illness in this sort of, in our medical view, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But she described that in her realm of the profession in Europe, they've got more empathic means of looking at problems. So, for instance, she'd heard of people going out of body, and so she decided to actually experiment herself, and so she actually went through the process of going out of body and actually starting to do it from a scientific point of view.
Yes.
So, for instance, when she actually achieved the out-of-body state, she literally reached down and measured her own pulse.
Yes.
So there's a doctor measuring her own pulse and then keeping it in a domestic environment. She went to see some of her family friends.
And we will be featuring the interview that you did with Rowney Kilder on the RichPlanet at some point. Now, we mentioned mind control because in the interview she claims that she believes that many of these incidents where people have gone into schools or colleges with guns and shot a whole class full of kids,
Yes.
she thinks that they are all mind control victims.
Those are mind control signatures, and I would fully agree with her on that. And for instance, the one in Newbury and in America, there's lots of cases, the Dunblane thing.
Yes.
It's the same basic pattern. They actually stimulate and activate somebody with guns who they allow to have guns.
Yeah.
And then there seems to be some kind of connection there with certain secret societies.
Yes.
Where they have a victim where they offer up and then basically press the button and see how well it will operate.
I mean, we can speculate as to the reason why someone would program someone to go and do such a thing. That, you know, and
I think there's
we're
the
getting
fear
into-
agenda there, terrifying people, making
Yeah.
everybody scared, and that's I think.
And we must bear in mind here that this has come from an ex-member of the Finnish government. This is
Yes.
not just
Yeah.
Joe Public speaking. The other claim that she came out with was that the swine flu was engineered by the pharmaceuticals to make money.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if she said that the actual flu was engineered. Or
Well, she says it's basically for big pharma,
Yeah.
and
The-
that clip that I isolated in my interview, I put that on YouTube, and that was actually copied. A number of people asked me if they could copy it. So it was copied into Spanish and I think Italian, and that got up to 4 million hits. Well, just at the end of 2009, literally December 29th, 30th,
Yeah.
I got this.
Which is when this scare was going on, and
Well,
every day on the news
yes.
it was, everyone's going to have to get vaccinated. Everyone's going to have to get
Yeah.
vaccinated.
And I got this warning that I'd violated YouTube rules, and that clip was taken off. Now, my clip had already got up to almost 400,000 hits, and my English clip, the original English clip, was taken off. But the next day, that's to say, at the start of business in the European Parliament, they were about to announce an investigation into the whole swine flu con, the way all the European countries have been conned into not only buying a first dose for this useless flu, but then they were contracted to buying a second dose, and they hadn't even used their first dose. So
Yep.
my interview was taken off YouTube just before it was going to be official that there was some serious questions to ask about that.
And, you know, some people might think that it's sinister that pharmaceuticals would deliberately try and benefit from selling all of these, the injections. But there's an even more worrying conspiracy theory that they were actually using it as a method of population control. We only need look at Jane Burgermeister, who uncovered evidence that, I think it was Baxter's, had live H5N1 virus in their vaccine, which was deadly to a group of ferrets that it was injected into. And that, some people believe, that was an attempt at mass genocide to try and wipe out sort of 5/6 of the world's population. And she believes that, Jane Burgermeister. So there are other more sinister reasons as to why they were possibly preparing the world for a swine flu vaccine.
Well, this has been done before. I mean, the whole thing happened with President Ford. Mm-hmm. So they did the swine flu thing. They did exactly the same thing. They had the same kind of results where people started getting very sick. They had brain issues, very severe brain issues. And that all happened before.
1976, I think.
Yes, and again, the same bunch of unsavory characters were involved with that.
Yes. I mean, I did a talk at the time in December 2009 and I covered the swine flu issue. And I actually approached my own local health authority and asked them to send an official there to be a spokesperson for the official view, because people were not trusting the vaccination that they were going to get. And my question was, how do people know that that's being tested properly? Can people go along and see it being tested? Well, the answer is no. It's sent by, under the auspices of the World Health Organization, and our governments have to trust what it is. But not only that, if the World Health Organization states that it's a matter of, I forget the language they use.
Pandemic?
Yeah, they have to follow the rules.
Yeah,
So,
this is one of the things that Rowney managed to get changed. The relevant classification for the flu was dropped from a particular category. I don't want to mention the wrong category in case I've got it wrong, but essentially the category it was initially at demanded that it was compulsory that you took the vaccine. Well, she managed to get it changed so that it only became voluntary. And of course, as fewer and fewer people are actually suffering from this flu at the time, the more people suffering from the normal flu, that a lot of people began to get suspicious.
Yeah.
And of course, this is just a rerun of what they did with the bird flu, which again was another complete farce. And I know that I was given certain restricted information by a certain personnel department in a certain media company. They'd actually planned at the highest level to reallocate or to allocate millions and millions of pounds to pay emergency staff, because they were prepared to lose so many staff due to this flu, that in order to physically keep the business running, businesses were actually planning a major contingency fund to get staff in from anywhere to physically keep things going.
Yes.
But again, none of that actually happened.
I think what may have happened in the UK, why they dropped that policy to inject everyone, I think they were doing covert monitoring of people's opinions. I know people in the NHS who were handed out questionnaires as to what their opinion of the vaccination program was, and there was no heading on this questionnaire. It was all done sort of just fill this in, and then they were sampling certain people in the NHS, and based on what those people, their opinion of it, was it right or wrong, I think they then dropped it. I think they would have vaccinated the whole population if they'd managed to get the propaganda out.
Well, I think it's like a lot of these things. It's if they don't win this time, they'll try another means.
Yeah.
And for instance, if you see this 1010 promo that's been running at the moment, where if you don't take certain precautions to deal with CO2, if you're at all hesitant with doing something to help the planet, somebody presses a red button, and anybody who's slightly hesitant just explodes.
Right.
And this is, I don't know if you've seen this particular promo, but that is how it's getting.
Yeah, it's an advert, isn't it? It's
yes.
To try and scare people into.
Yeah, and if you're at all hesitant, bingo,
yes,
you're gone. And again, that's exactly the same kind of agenda and politics that happened before World War II in Germany.
Now, another one of Rowney Kilder's major areas that she speaks on is UFOs, because she was invited to one particular high-profile UFO conference in 1991, I believe, in Moscow.
Yes. Two of the top US military people, I think it was Stubblebine and Alexander, were in Moscow. This is before the Soviets dissolved, and this is in proper Soviet Russia.
Yes.
They were present there. Stubblebine there, was Alexander there, and I think Alexander's future
Colonel
wife.
John Alexander, yeah.
Yeah, and that's John B. Alexander, I think.
Yeah.
And then Rowney was there. So they were the only 4 Western people that were at that conference. Now, Rowney was brought down into a separately, but she was isolated from the US military. Now, this is US military in Moscow talking about UFOs with top Soviet cosmonauts.
Yes.
And this is a major conference with top US military, Stubblebine and people like that, talking about UFOs in the Soviet Union.
Now, she claims that she was taken down into like almost a secret room underneath where they were having this conference.
Yes.
And she was taken into a room with photographs.
Photographs of landing sites all across the Soviet Union.
Of UFOs.
Of UFOs and the whole 9 yards.
Right. Right.
So this is a unique opportunity that, as a Westerner, that she was given access to this information. So clearly to tell people about later on.
Right. I mean, so why do you think they singled her out to give her that information? I mean, Finland is it a non-NATO country? So
I think Finland is. I think sort of bats with both sides of the bat.
Does it border the Soviet Union?
It borders it, and they managed to fight off the Soviet Union very successfully in World War II. They ferociously fought them off, and they were very successful. So otherwise they'd be part of Russia.
It makes you wonder why they showed her that particular room with those.
That's a good question, and it's also a good question as to why she's with my friend as well. But there's a whole lot of questions there.
I mean, your classic skeptic would say, oh, they were obviously performing a psyop on her by taking her down there. I mean,
I don't know if she was performing a psyops, but certainly you don't introduce somebody to that kind of data unless you expect them to react to it and talk to people about it.
Yeah, and if we go sort of to the other side of the Atlantic, you've also interviewed American Bill Uhouse.
Yeah, Bill Uhouse is little known as one of the main whistleblowers at Area 51 and the Dreamland complex. And I was very honoured to get to know Bill. He's a no-nonsense aeronautics engineer, and he was responsible for building and testing the simulators so that the pilots could get used to the avionics systems in order to fly the man-made or the upgraded versions of the flying disc, so-called alien flying disc technology.
Right.
Now, Bill Uhouse is obviously...
So this is when they're trying to back-engineer an alleged alien craft.
We have to keep... He was there to build and test the avionics systems for flight control so that the human flight control systems would interface with the flying discs. Right. And the flying disc would actually be sitting there on like a pole to hold them down, so that the disc would be able to completely maneuver in every angle of yaw but at the same time not actually physically take off.
Right.
So that was his job. His job was to interface essentially the ET control mechanisms or the whatever control mechanisms, because are we talking German flying saucers here again?
Right. So
Uhouse is clearly a Western, Eastern European name.
And he wouldn't have had a need to know that it was a back-engineered ET craft, presumably. So how would he actually...
Uhouse worked with an ET called J-Rod.
Right.
And this is where we get...
Is that in your interview with him?
Yes.
Does he come out with this claim?
He comes out. And J-Rod is about... again, we're dealing with US military, or... He also mentions a lot of companies that are involved with this: Russian, French, British, I think Canadian, possibly Australian companies that are involved with these projects. He also brought it back to World War II, and so we have an environment where we have ET or some kind of flying disc technology involving ETs from the World War II level, involving an awful lot of countries against Soviet Union, cooperating with the Americans on ET so-called technologies, even though publicly they're at war, or potentially at war.
All right, Miles.
And this is at the test site, as he called it. He didn't actually say Area 51, it's at the test sites.
Right, okay. Well, big claims, and we're going to talk more about Bill Uhouse after the break.
The RichPlanet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
Welcome back on board the Starship. I'm talking with Miles Johnston. Now, before the break, we were talking about Bill Uhouse, and you said that he interfaced or communicated with this ET called J-Rod. Now, a lot of people will say, well, a load of bunk. Now, do you take him on his word with that,
I
Miles?
take him on his word,
so
because
why would they allow some engineer who's to the overall project isn't probably that important on the project?
Well, he was very important for that, because there's some more information about Uhouse where he was involved with some crash retrievals. Now, the thing about Uhouse is, and this is quite important, in that he was able to describe, he describes a lot of the classification levels.
Yes.
He also described that Area 51, that Dreamland complex, is effectively its own country, and it's run by an elite. Okay?
This is where the president is only on level 19, and there's 30 odd different.
But the thing about it is, I think this is quite important, is that he described how specialists in whatever section that you were involved with, be it avionics or computing or whatever you are, that you would get, for instance, 100 of those guys, top-notch guys, qualified to the bee's knees, top-level clearance, and they'd actually be told, right, you're going to meet an alien. This is what they look like. This is what all sorts of information. But out of that lot, a very small amount could physically stomach, actually physically, mentally handle the actual encounter with the ETs.
Right.
And that's down to how your brain works and how the biophysical electrical field that a being generates access and hits you when you first meet them. And only very few people can actually deal with that. And that, I think, is one of the most significant connections.
So did Newhouse claim to have actually set eyes on this ET?
Yes, he worked with them, and he actually hand drew a drawing of J-Rod. Now, I've got that on the front cover of Basis 2 Take 2. And the point about J-Rod is it's got the round eyes.
Yes.
So what I'm suggesting possibly is what he was working with was maybe one of the generated life forms that Barry King talks about, because Barry King talks about grey type ETs with round eyes. Now, the one thing about on that drawing quickly is that the hands of the ET are very well developed and strong. So are we dealing with some kind of crossbred human here and not an ET? And those are the questions which need answers.
So what did Newhouse say in this interview? Did he say that it might have been some kind of genetically engineered life form?
He didn't mention anything at all about that. In fact, I wasn't able to get a really good interview with him about J-Rod. This was an impromptu thing. I got about 40 minutes with him. It's the only 40 minutes that he ever talked about on camera in any detail. Now, I think there's a one or two. There might be one thing that he spoke to a Spanish people on, but that's it. And Bill, I got to know Bill for many years, but he passed away about last year. But he is featured in the book Disclosure Through Limited, Camouflage Through Limited Disclosure, and that was released last year.
Yes. And did he actually mention how communication took place? Whether it was telepathic or through language?
No, but he did mention the spiritual side of the history behind the Greys. He concentrated on the Greys.
Right, we'll come on to mind control later on in the interview, Miles, but I just want to stick with the UFO subject for a little while and talk about Larry Warren. Now, Larry Warren was one of the American airmen at Rendlesham Forest Base when the 1980 UFO event occurred. Now, can you tell us a little bit about Larry? Because you interviewed him, I think, in round about '96, and you also interviewed him last year. What part did he play in the whole Rendlesham story?
Well, essentially, Larry was the whistleblower that kept the Rendlesham Forest incident alive. And if it wasn't for Larry's whistleblowing, but he was talking on behalf of both himself and his roommate and other people who only until quite recently have now actually stood forth and actually stated. So in many respects, he was talking sort of third party, but he kept the fire burning on this. I mean, I remember hearing him on the Art Bell show before that became Coast to Coast AM, and he came up with immense details. And in fact, before I actually interviewed him, he was physically having an interview with a reporter from the Times newspaper. Yes. And the detail and information that he came out about the base and about all the sort of things that were going on there was very, very intense. So that interview that I got, it was the first time, I believe, that it was announced where the UFOs, whatever they were targeting a massive stockpile of strategic nuclear weapons, which the British government didn't know about. And this was at the RAF Woodbridge and Bentwaters base, where the UFO, again, we don't know what it was, but it targeted and actually neutralized those weapons.
It shot a beam down into the nuclear
and
facility.
that was actually Charles Holt, the deputy base commander, has now come and backed him up and actually saying, and he said that at a Washington Press Club.
Yeah. Gary Heseltine was working with him on a film script, and Charles Holt came out with that press release just over a year ago, and as you say, he took part in a press conference at Washington DC.
Yes.
And there's also James Peniston who has taken part in Washington DC press conferences as well, and their statements, solid statements, are very difficult to dispute. These are reliable witnesses.
But from the Larry Warren point of view, if he hadn't kept that case going, that case could have died.
So he's an important
character, and at that time in '96, for him to come up with that was very rare. Brenda Butler was who was one of the most important investigators of the Rendlesham Forest thing. She's on the ground. She's continuing research there to this day. The area has got multiple strange events happening, and they went into the base with Matthew Williams, who was one of my. We cooperated in that era of UFO research on certain interviews.
I've actually heard accounts that there were 80 airmen witnessed the craft. I mean,
This is a huge event. There were like 3 landed UFOs.
Yeah, what really disappoints me, Miles, about the Rendlesham case is the BBC's coverage of it. They had an article on their website where they were just completely and utterly debunking it, and they hadn't consulted any serious UFO researchers on that
I
to write that article.
I don't know about that. I think I have to disagree with you. The BBC have got some excellent consultants, which we would describe as.
It was Evan Davis who wrote the article. I've never believed in UFOs. I mean, the UFO community were up in arms about that piece of debunking nonsense that they published on their website, and you've got all of these top military witnesses like Charles Holt with concrete statements. Why can't they just write a proper serious article?
Well, the point about it is that's the big question. That's the question of what you look at the actions. Look at how the BBC acted in this regard. Almost every single UFO documentary that was made by the BBC, when we first cooperated with them in Ireland, I had almost roused with the BBC, seen around 6 reporters, and all they're interested in is getting information in. And anybody who appears on, I mean, I've talked to lighting crews who were involved with some crop circle documentaries for Channel 4, and they were so horrified with the way that the production crew were actually going to do, the way they're going to treat certain witnesses. Yep. And there was, for instance, one recently for the Now show, or the BBC show at 7 o'clock, whatever that is.
The One Show.
The One Show, sorry.
Yeah.
Where they interviewed a number of top people. The One Show. They interviewed a number of top people.
I nearly swore there.
For it's like an hour, with I think your man Mackenzie, and there was one of the guys from John Wickham from Bufora, and the editor of Nexus magazine.
Yes. Marcus Allen.
Marcus Allen. They interviewed for an hour. I think 45 seconds of that got on air. Mm-hmm. All they want is information, so they get people together and get the information out, and then poo-poo it.
Every researcher I have met who has had any brush with the BBC has the same thing to say. And I wouldn't be allowed to repeat it on this show. I mean, unless you're actually involved in the field, you're just sitting at home watching your TV, you wouldn't realise what goes on behind the scenes.
What the BBC does, and what a lot of the main media people do, Discovery Channel, History, and the relevant mainstream media, essentially they use the thing, I'm going to be on TV.
Yes.
And then, I'm on TV, wow, I'm going to be famous or something. And then they just let you rattle on.
Yes.
And then they just say, right, we'll just do this, this and that. And they have their agenda.
Making sure that you've signed the
disclosure,
the fact that they can edit it as they wish. And
where's mine? I left it down on the planet.
No, you won't be signing anything, man.
No, but that's how they work. So if you've got to understand, I mean, generally anybody who's going to go on media with the established media, you've got to understand that you've got about 10 seconds to get your point across.
Yeah.
Speak in very short sentences. Don't, and then just get the point across, so no matter what they do with their editing, that point is the only thing they can get across, or they don't use it at all.
Yeah, I mean, and Miles is in a very good position to comment here, because Miles actually works for a large media organisation and has a technical role in that, so he knows just how things are edited and chopped and squeezed down to a soundbite, really, aren't they?
And again, you've got to understand that with television or whatever it is, you've only got a few seconds, or radio. Just get your point across very quickly, and that's it.
Yeah. Unlike our show.
Right
then. Now, you produced a documentary, Miles, called, what was it called, 777?
It was O to Catch a Circle Maker.
Oh, yeah. O to Catch a Circle Maker.
It was
about the 777 crop circle, which was probably one of the most famous crop circles ever, which appeared on the 7th of the 7th, 07. And there's this film footage, allegedly, of the thing appearing very suddenly.
Very simply.
The Win Keach footage, which... I actually met Win Keach.
Now, let's describe Win. Win is a brilliant researcher, and he witnessed a crop circle actually happening, and he had his camera running. But in the mid-90s, cameras were simply not sensitive enough to pick up that information. Actually, you just got a black screen. basically, Wynne was on the hill, looking down in pitch dark, very low light. He had a number of cameras of
3 o'clock in the morning or something.
So yeah, he had a number of cameras of different sensitivities. And he was there with a guy called Gary King and his girlfriend, and they were simply just watching, as many people have done, Japanese TV crews have done, etc., for many, many years. The crucial thing about this is there was some kind of an EMP, or that's an EMP, a pulse.
An electromagnetic pulse.
And
There was
all his cameras,
a blip on the camera.
all his cameras, all 4 of the standalone cameras and his, even the mobile phone, everything was shut down. And said, what has happened here? So some kind of EMP shut down all his cameras. Now, up to that point, they're just looking at the cameras, they're just recording the cameras. They can't really see anything. It's pitch dark, so all this analysis has to happen afterwards. But the shock thing was the pulse. So by the time he gets all the things going again, the light's slightly changing. It's now getting, I think, something like 10 or 12 minutes past 3 in the morning. There's a slight change in the light, and they can see something in the field. A big crop circle is there.
Yeah.
Now, it then the lights are beginning to come up because it's July, and they could just start seeing things. So they were able to run down into the field round about 3:45. That's Gary, and they actually saw this crop circle.
Yeah. Now, I know that I've been told by David Caton that they were in that circle, and they have seen the classic board marks throughout that circle, which proves it's man-made.
Well, this is the
That's
whole
what I've been
point.
told.
This is the whole point. I'll say now I've met the people who made the formation.
Yeah.
Now, the point about it is that this is a classic case of where it does not matter who the crop circles are. This is what I mean by mind control and the manipulation of human consciousness to generate false realities. And that is where the key to this whole thing is.
Right.
The one thing we do with crop circles is it doesn't matter who makes them or how they're made, we look at them.
Well, what if it's MI5 that are making them, which is not the MI5 aren't making them, but
I call them
I'm
MI6,
convinced
MI6
that somehow the funding is going to the person, the linchpin that I spoke about in my film,
yes.
And perhaps that pulse is maybe when they've got their team on the ground and they're about to do the circle, maybe they trigger a pulse just to knock out any cameras that happen to be there.
The point is there was another researcher, there's a whole other experiment done by a Dutch university, and all their cameras were destroyed, ripped open, film cameras. Now the point is, this is very, very important. Another researcher, Andy Buckley, was in the field and he had a Geiger counter, and he was in that crop circle, and there was an Apache helicopter just doing some flying, and again, the army are there, they're flying their helicopters, and they're also doing other stuff, because during that press conference which I filmed, when all that happened, again, certain things happened to stop me getting to that press conference, I was aware of. But anyway, there was a press conference when the stuff was released, and an initial analysis by award-winning Terry Toftanis was announced, and it looked then that this was actually a genuine crop circle.
And this is all covered in your film.
This is covered in the film.
But
the point is that the helicopter, with the radiation from the helicopter, when I tried to get that video into the computer, 3 times my computer stopped, which means there's still active material on the VHS tape from that radiation, whatever that was, which still worked almost a year later to shut the computer down.
Just one other point to make, having me said, oh, well, this was a man-made one, I am not saying that every single circle is man-made. I just want to say that circles that David Caton and Robert Hulse have filmed clearly show that they cannot have been planked, and that's in my film, Crop Circles, the Hidden Truth.
It doesn't matter who makes them or how they're made.
Well,
somebody is fiddling with our perception.
In my opinion, Miles, it's fairly simple. There is an unexplained phenomenon, which is possibly ET, possibly that our military are interested in and want to keep everyone away from, and that's why they have sponsored the crop circle makers. So there are 2 separate phenomena.
Oh, definitely, there are elements to muddy the waters there.
Yeah.
But the point is that whatever happened in that field that set off Andy Buckley's Geiger counter when that Apache was flying over that man-made crop circle, months later, on an analog VHS tape, there was something still there, a sub-code message,
All right.
which shut down my computer 3 times. So the only way I could get that picture of the Geiger counter working, get it into the computer to do the edit, and I lost 4 hard drives doing that.
Right.
I lost 4 hard drives, and I had to use backup data to get that thing completed. There is still a sub-code message in there which was actively activated to shut down my computer. The only way we could get round that was to use active thought to overcome it.
All right then, Miles. Well, we're going to talk about mind control after the break. Welcome back on board the Starship. I'm talking to researcher Miles Johnston. Now, we mentioned at the very start of the interview, Miles, your interview with Dr. Rowney Kilder. And one of the other things that she has spoken about is mind control. Because she believes that people are being taken and they are being programmed for a variety of nefarious purposes. And you've started looking into this, and you have interviewed people who claim to be mind control victims. One of them in particular is a guy called Dave Marrow.
My name's David Marrow. Basically, I have a story to tell about my experiences. Used to be called Manderson, comes from the Scottish name Manderson, Scottish royalty. Goes back to Scottish royalty and Egyptian royalty. Used to live on the Orkney Islands near Caveness, where the heraldry of the Manderson family was.
So how did you get there? What brought you to the Orkney Islands?
Yeah, I was taken there by a guy called Chris Marrow. He, bit of a nefarious character in his own way, took me there after being adopted and fostered. I was born in the Royal Berkshire Hospital, lived in Newbury for a bit, went to the Orkney Islands.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about this guy?
This is
Miles?
getting into a very, very deep, very sinister, dark subject. It's when we're talking about taking children before the age of 5. And this is also brings in James Casbolt. And again, people would say that these people are, they're out of their heads. Well, if you've gone through this kind of atrocious torture, it's called trauma-induced mind control. What they basically do is, before the child's mind is properly formed physically or biophysically or biologically formed, they shock through pain and torture the human brain into absolute blinding.
Neil Sanders spoke about this when he was on. Trauma-based mind control.
Trauma-based.
So trying to create and fracture you into more different
in other words, you
personalities.
create a situation where the brain is in so much pain, the brain actually shuts that part of the brain off and generates a different experiential existence for itself. And that's what they want to do, because once you've done that, you've created a whole new compartment in the mind, which you can then actually activate and then program, and then you switch. They generate a technique to switch them on and off. Now, that's part of the Monarch mind control programming, which has been used and demonstrated.
Monarch, and that's
Monarch.
You believe that to be British military?
It's CIA.
doing this,
It's well known. It was done on a main top model in the States, where they're able to mind control her, and it was used as a means of transporting highly sensitive data. Now, the whole point about that is you get ordinary people who've got no connection with military at all, or the intelligence services. You switch them on, give them the message, switch them off. They then go to wherever they're going on their normal business, or maybe they don't even know they're on the business when they're active. Deliver the message. The other person at the other end then switches them off. They then go home. They haven't a clue what they've done.
So what you're talking about there is one reason for mind controlling an individual, so that they can carry some information that's in their head and they're not aware of it being there.
Don't know
so they could
about
be
it.
tortured to hell and they still wouldn't give the secret away.
And it's very economical. Now, what they've done is they've essentially radically expanded on that whole thing into what we now call the super soldier program.
Right.
So that you can also access biophysical parts of the mind to self-heal. So, for instance, when you get cut very badly, you can use the psychic part of your mind, fully activated and programmed, to actually re-image the wound.
Well, let's stick.
And that's what Dave Morrow was all about.
Right.
And that involves ritual child abuse in Scotland, which of course brings in the Holly Creed case and that whole really dark side of mind control.
how many whistleblowers are there to these mind control programs who claim to have been in them?
Well,
I mean,
there's
other
an
than Dave
increasing
Morrow.
amount, and this is one of the reasons why Dave Morrow came forward to do that, along with Alistair, was to start getting the message out.
Alistair is a guy who he's
Was part
featured
of-
in your
yes,
video.
Yes.
And
And
he
that involves RAF Culmhead and Burnworthy Manor, for where they train the super soldiers. And again, there was a recent BBC programme involving two Swedish twins who ran onto the M6, got knocked down by cars and trucks, and were able to just get up and complain about it afterwards. That is super soldiers.
Right, okay, so super soldiers. Some people will find this hard to believe, Miles. Just explain, is this someone who's genetically modified at birth, or is this...
Well, this is the thing, that this is one of the things which we, again, connecting with Barry King, is that one of the stories that Barry King was involving about was called the survey done at schools. So there's a detailed survey done with schools and medical records. And again, Bill Newhouse mentions this. Bill Newhouse has got a certain lineage genetically, and this is where certain people with certain sets of genetics are brought into these kind of programs.
I mean, you see, I've watched all of the Barry King material, and I'm still looking for more information, shall we say.
Absolutely. That stuff's going back 15 years now.
Right, right. I mean, I have got a theory on Barry King. But
we had no... This was why when I made the interviews, I made them in such a way that, right, we're not going to leave too much stuff on the cutting room floor. The idea, right, let Barry King speak. We then have James Casbolt.
Yeah.
And then James Casbolt connects us with Matt Todd with the magnetic implants, and then it also connects us with Alistair and Dave M. So this story is evolving, and at the moment it's a story because, I mean, we don't...
Out of all of the, you know, the interviews on mind control, I find Dave Morrow to be the most convincing.
Yeah, he said he wouldn't be able to look at the camera.
Right.
And he described that at the camera. So I had a situation where this guy claims he can Hulk out. That's to say he can biophysically make his body so strong that when they actually jump out with his female partner, he was paired with, and again, this pairs up with James Casbolt, with his partner, who's in the research. It's maybe too detailed for now.
But, I mean, let's just stick on
the
Dave
crucial
Morrow.
thing about this is that Dave is talking about fighting an enemy. Why do they need the super soldiers? Now, there seems to be a very wide mark for what is a super soldier.
Just broadly, Miles, they've taken someone and given them mind control.
He was
from a very young age.
Yes,
but then they can take that person, abduct that person, send them on some kind of mission where they will kill people or whatever.
Yeah.
They come back and then they turn back off,
Yeah.
and then they're put back into society, and they don't even know they've done that mission, and it's all done through hypnosis and psychotronics. Now, and they're possibly given, you know, advanced training on that program that they're not actually aware of. So that's the principle of it. But this Dave Morrow he's got implants which give off
there's
radio
frequency
radio
implants
waves
that move.
He's got implants.
And this is where we come back to.
Let's just concentrate on what Morrow claims and what he said that
Morrow was involved with the Orkney child abuse scandal.
Right. So from a young age he was adopted.
He was adopted.
He was
adopted, selected before birth.
Yeah,
and his mother was essentially
right, and into a military family.
Yes.
And a Freemasonic family.
Yes, and taken up to Orkney Islands.
They went into Orkney, and he has had flashbacks of being used in satanic rituals. Am I right?
Yes, but the point is, these guys are still running active program. Now, if you're still running active program, do you believe a word they're saying? But it seems that the active program is saying, hello, we have a weapon system here, which is why that program on the BBC, Madness in the Fast Lane, with those two
the two Swedish twins.
This is a clear demonstration of a weapon system in full sight. So with Dave M and the other guys coming forward, and James Casbolt with all the stuff he's saying, and with all the stuff that Barry King is saying, and all the stuff that Bill Newhouse said. Bill Newhouse actually said, Miles, it's like somebody like you that we were giving this information out. This is information that they're not, oh, we're whistleblowing. They're active, they're in active programming, and they're telling us about something which is a major weapon system, programming human beings for work or some kind of thing off-plan, or to fight an enemy they need a super soldier for.
All right.
Dave M claims he can literally be dropped out of an aeroplane into the theatre without a parachute and go straight into theatre.
Right. And this guy Alistair, who you on one of your interviews
Yes.
you have on camera,
He's a friend of Dave's.
He's a friend of Dave Marrow's.
Yeah.
All right. And he's done research into mind control programs and
Yeah, he
and
describes the
sort of-
Monarch program, and on the video that I've got with Dave, I let Alistair actually describe the whole Monarch program and a top beautiful model that was used in America. And again, when they choose a public icon, like a top #1 beautiful woman, a model, and they can just say, right, we've mind controlled her to do things, it's them laughing in our face. We can choose your best and finest, and then just do what the hell we like with them. And then this is obviously the book Transformation of America with Kathy O'Brien. It discusses this.
I think Neil Sanders was talking about that. Is it Lindsay Lohan, one of them?
Could be, I don't know.
Right. Maybe.
Again,
He's mentioned two singers, American females.
There's
who,
a lot
who,
of them
who
in,
he
in the
thinks are
American
mind
country
control.
music
He thinks
program.
are mind control.
Yes,
victims.
Kathy O'Brien mentions this in the country music thing. And talking about mind control, my friend or my colleague who was involved with Energy 106 in Belfast, who was abducted 4 times, he also was given a lot of cooperation from certain producers in Nashville. And again, this is me running a pirate station, running a megawatt into Belfast until 2005, and we're let do it.
Right.
Now, that means somebody somewhere is saying, you're allowed to do this.
Right.
Now, what we did with Kiss FM in '88 is what we cracked Matrix. We did a thing which Radio Caroline was doing, that there was something that was involved with Caroline and the sub-programming of the music. Again, that leads us to the Montauk Project, and again, mind control.
So you think there's something in the carrier wave of the radio signal which is doing things to people's minds without them.
Thought. And
So
that's where we deal with the BBC transmitters and these black artifacts.
But if you were running a pirate radio station, which you were,
I've run a lot of them.
how
I'm a bad boy.
How have the evil authorities managed to add in their signal onto your carrier wave?
That's when we,
How is that
we
done?
come up with the scuttlers and this black fluidic energy, which I described in Basis 4.
Right. So, is that a piece of technology that they've?
It's something to do with some kind of subspace material. And again, Tom Bearden talks about this as a weapons system in his book Oblivion, I believe, where they generate they're called subspace engines, which they transmit in subspace, and then they come through your computer system or inter some kind of interface system. It could be a television set, and your mind is then used to generate the reality, and they then do the harm. Then,
but you need, in order to convince people of this, Miles, you need something tangible.
It's
for
very
people
heavily
to
described.
Understand.
Yes,
I mean,
they need to read Tom Bearden's book.
Tom Bearden.
Tom Bearden is a retired colonel. He does an awful lot of discussion on zero-point energy, but also on scalar weather warfare. Now, Tom Bearden is a retired military colonel from the United States Army, so he's going to have a strong bias and a strong field of perspective with military operations. But it's in his book Oblivion and a number of other books on radiant energy.
You mentioned earlier, just to change the subject, Matt Todd, who's another one of your interviewees, and one of the clips in that I found quite intriguing was he claims to have been abducted and been implanted, but he wasn't aware of these implants until he started putting a magnet on his body. So this guy, I mean, there's obviously something metallic under his skin.
Well, what happened with Matt Todd was that, again, we're dealing with things in the etheric, out of body. And again, we're talking that one of the crucial things about Rowney Kilder is she went out of body voluntarily.
Yeah. These things are in his body, aren't they?
Well, what happened was he rescued a whole pile of abductees out of cages, and these ETs followed him, and he was able to kill four of the ETs.
Right. He claims.
This is.
I mean, I'm more interested in these.
This is the story.
Physical things in his body.
He was fired at by I think one of the ETs, and they hit him in the lower abdomen.
Right.
Now the point was that when he was then abducted he was seduced by 2 beautiful women, brought into this facility, and the 2 beautiful women, he turned his head, they turned into greys because they were in mind shift. What they do is they get you to see They don't do the shape shifting. They make your mind do it for them.
I've heard this.
So they make you see what they want you to see.
Yeah.
Right. So cutting a long story short, again and again with all these cases, we're constantly getting U.S. military personnel involved.
Yeah.
Now this is again the mind control, the aliens, the whole thing is heavily involved with U.S. military and the underground bases here
So you're saying these things in his body were part of
they were
like
put
a
into
bullet
him.
from some weapon?
He was able to get access to these facilities by physically going out of body,
right,
in the etheric. One of the things that we're told constantly is if you're in the etheric and you're a ghost, your hand will go through things. It will go through things because you believe it to go through things. But if you're in the etheric, you have physical power. So if you tell yourself you have physical power in etheric, then you can physically lift things and you're invisible.
right.
And this again a demonstration. So the point was he was able to physically get into these facilities according to his claims.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was they fired these implants at him so that it would not allow him back in again.
Right.
And he demonstrated that by putting magnets on them.
Yeah.
And again, I'm just like you in the sense that...
So I mean, were it fired at a distance? Or was it like
I don't know.
So they've somehow...
I don't know. It's described in the interviews.
That, you know, has he looked at getting them removed at all, or...?
No.
I mean, it would be interesting to find out what they are.
Well, it would be if we get the whole scans. Now, the point about this is somebody was scanned. I'm not too sure if it was Dave M. It was only in a hospital in Warminster, and it uses, I think, magnetic resonance imaging.
Yeah.
And they got something using that.
Right.
And again, it's down to the medical, it's down to what they're letting you on to detect. And a lot of this stuff is in a much higher frequency, a resonant frequency much higher than our physical reality. So again, we're dealing with several octaves above the normal physical existence that we would consider ourselves to exist.
All right then, Miles. Well, we've run out of time, but we will screen extracts from your interviews because some of them the information in them is phenomenal.
That's what they're for.
Okay, and thanks very much indeed for coming on board. You've been a
So big,
mind-boggling guest.
It's huge.
And we'll get you beamed back down to planet Earth.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it just remains for me to say, keep your eyes on the skies, keep your feet on the ground, and tell all your friends about this show.
Obviously, she then started to develop an analysis of mind control, which is the main reason I wanted to see her.
Right. Now she's a woman in a highly, top job in the Finnish government.
Yeah.
And she was taken seriously with these books. She wasn't, by a lot of people she was
This
taken
is what she
seriously.
describes in the interview, in that in essence in the United States and probably in this country, there's a pill solves all for every kind of illness in this sort of, in our medical view, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But she described that in her realm of the profession in Europe, they've got more empathic means of looking at problems. So, for instance, she'd heard of people going out of body, and so she decided to actually experiment herself, and so she actually went through the process of going out of body and actually starting to do it from a scientific point of view.
Yes.
So, for instance, when she actually achieved the out-of-body state, she literally reached down and measured her own pulse.
Yes.
So there's a doctor measuring her own pulse and then keeping it in a domestic environment. She went to see some of her family friends.
And we will be featuring the interview that you did with Rowney Kilda on the RichPlanet at some point.
But, it's down to the molecular, well, you know what I mean.
We'll get your record card sorted for you, Miles.
Hello.
Now, you've been investigating UFOs for 30 years, am I right?
Wee bit longer than that, but we'll just leave it 30 years for the
Okay.
censors.
All right. And you set up an organisation in Ireland, I believe.
Yeah, we started the first UFO investigations a long time ago in the 70s. We called it the Irish UFO Research Centre. And we were the first people to actually start doing proper UFO research.
Right.
And that led us to quite a lot of early stories in the 70s and
Right.
early on to the 80s, and we were closely affiliated with the Before organization as it was then. Unfortunately, things have gone a bit, have changed since then.
The British UFO
That's the British UFO
Research.
Research Association, of which
Yeah.
I was the regional investigations coordinator for.
Right. Now, some people think that Bufora were there to try and put cold water on UFO cases.
I think that's been, I mean, without being too, I mean, a lot of good people in there, but it seems to be clear that there was a situation where there's a lot of information in and very little information out. But there's some people have now been able to start digitizing some of the records, and I'm in there in those early days. So I
Right.
was proud to be a contributor and to help wake up. And we ran a very good little organization. We published a magazine called the Irish UFO News.
Right.
and
Now,
so forth.
now you spent your time during those years attending conferences, and you filmed a lot of the speakers and a lot of the
Yeah.
researchers. So you've got a vast archive of
Yeah,
people on
essentially,
camera.
we recorded them on tape, audio tape, cassette at that time. But
Yeah.
as technology evolved, I started to record stuff. And the first stuff possibly was the Barry King material, which I published as basis.
That was the first stuff, and
Yeah.
we will come on to Barry King
Yeah.
later in the interview. Now, one of your most impressive interviews was with Dr. Rowney Kilder,
Yes.
who was the Finnish chief medical officer.
She was
I believe.
she's former chief medical officer of Finland.
Mind control technology affecting our consciousness, and microchips and the planned future for mankind. I had this this lecture in Charlottesville in Virginia in April, and it says here she's a Finnish best-selling author living in Norway, retired chief medical officer of North Finland, Lapland, with 3 medical specialities. Her biography is in
Welcome on board the RichPlanet starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall. This week's guest is a researcher of UFOs and human perception manipulation. With a background in media and electronics, he is currently investigating claims of human mind control. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. Miles Johnston.
Wow, jeez, it's so far. Oh, hello, hello. Good.
How
to
are
see
you?
God, it makes you cold out, you know.
Really?
I've seen the movies, you know. You get that bit of frost.
American Who is Who in the World, Who is Who in Medicine and Healthcare, Who is Who in Science and Engineering. She's the first doctor to have published near-death experiences of children in '82 in the international bestseller There Is No Death. This book is in 6 languages.
And is a fine lady and first-class character. And I have a friend in Norway who I'd been trying to get to see Rowney for a considerable length of time. And then one day I was talking to my Norwegian friend, and she says, "Do you want to talk to Rowney Kilder?" And just simply put the phone across the desk. And she lives right there in Norway where my friend was, so I was able to go and interview her in the winter time, and it was a wonderful experience, and she's a great lady.
And she has written best-selling books on out-of-body experiences.
She has written a whole series of very high-selling books in Nordic European languages. And a lot of people have asked about an English book, but she's now writing an English book. But she had started to do the English and American lecture circuit, and she did live in Wiltshire for quite a time as well.
Right.
So people saw her then, and she got familiar with what was going on with the crop circles and all.